Horror media is usually released throughout the year, but it definitely thrives during October, which is Halloween season in the West. Fine, it's probably the last week of October that's Halloween season, but I like to think it's the whole of the month. Which is why I've been uploading horror-related videos for the past 3 weeks. I'll get back to non-horror themed videos in November. I'll be uploading more videos on Leisure Suit Larry and other retro games, so make sure to subscribe if you like my content. I'll also be getting back to my Heroes of Might and Magic inspired songs with a giveaway for Olden Era when it releases, so make sure to join the Discord server I've linked to in the description for updates, if that interests you. Back to what I was saying. Yeah, Halloween. I have a soft spot for horror games, maybe because when I was a kid, the girl who'd occasionally babysit us would watch horror films, and that scared the hell out of me, until it didn't. And since then, I've become a great fan of horror media, especially horror games, but in this video, I'll be focusing on a few horror point-and-click adventure games I liked, starting off with Overclocked, A History of Violence. The English voiceover version of the game was released in 2008, and follows the story of an army psychiatrist being sent to a mental asylum as he tries to figure out why 5 teenagers with amnesia popped up in New York City waving guns around in the middle of the street. The game came out during a period when point-and-click adventure games were not very popular, so there wasn't much competition. The fact that the main character uses a PDA to record and play back the patient's confessions was quite novel at the time. According to my YouTube analytics, the people who watch my videos are old enough to know what a PDA is, so I'm not going to explain it. I remember the inventory puzzles being quite simple, but the overall feeling of the game was enjoyable, so there's that at least. Even though the game is a psychological thriller, the fact that it takes place in a mental asylum at night is tense enough to include the game in a list of games for Halloween. And even though the inclusion of Overclocked could be considered questionable by some, the next game on the list is definitely Halloween themed, and that's A Vampyre Story, also released in 2008. One of the designers of A Vampyre Story is Bill Tiller, who worked at LucasArts as a background artist and gained prominence with his exceptional work on The Curse of Monkey Island background art in 1997. The game is set in the late 19th century and features Mona, an opera singer who got kidnapped by a vampire and turned into one herself. You have to help Mona escape the castle in which she's confined and make her way to Paris. Except you'll never make it to Paris, since this is only the first part of the game, and it ends on a kind of cliffhanger. Sure, the overall premise might have room for improvement, but when the game came out, it was fun and enjoyable, even though having replayed it a few years ago, some things in the game ended up contradicting my initial impressions. The game was supposed to carry on in A Vampyre Story 2: A Bat's Tale, which was only recently announced, or re-announced if you will, so we might get to see the end of Mona's story 18 years later. Next up on the list is Sanitarium, a psychological horror game released in 1998. I wasn't sure I wanted to include this game on the list mainly because it'd be a mess to explain the plot without having to expand too much, but here goes nothing. You wake up from a coma after being hit by a car in a sanitarium with your head all bandaged up and, wait for it, amnesia. As you move through the corridors of the sanitarium, you are transported into various locales and situations, but it's all in the protagonist's mind, and you have to regain your memories piece by piece. This may sound very contrived and cliché, but the overall puzzling and atmosphere are quite fun. It may sound like I'm knocking it, but it's actually a very good point-and-click adventure game that one should play at least once, preferably during Halloween. It nails the horror aesthetic, especially during the first half, with the only discrepancy being a part where you're transported to Aztec times, which seems quite out of place. Overall though, this is a game I enjoy very much, and I'm definitely recommending it. I'm quite fond of the next game, but it may not be everyone's cup of tea, and that's the interactive adventures of Doc Mendonça and Pizzaboy. A point-and-click adventure game adapted after a comic book with great artwork and somewhat okay plot and puzzles. Fine, the game is serviceable, but artwork, characters, and overall comedy horror feel is great for me. You play as Pizzaboy, the apprentice of a middle-aged werewolf called Doc Mendonça, as he has to pretend to be a detective in the supernatural underworld of Lisbon. Yep, Lisbon, in Portugal. The game features beautiful comic book-styled cutscenes and backgrounds, and the story is silly enough to be right out of one of the 3 comic book issues that were released. It's about 3 to 4 hours long, and the whole supernatural feel makes it a fun game to play during Halloween. The puzzles are simple, and in many cases quite easy, but get somewhat unreasonable towards the end. The game, however, is quite cheap when on sale, so spending something like €1.50 for the graphics and overall atmosphere and humor is great value for money. Shivers is a first-person point-and-click adventure game in the style of Myst and The Seventh Guest, the latter of which is also a horror game. It was released in 1995 and it was co-written by Roberta L. Williams. The game introduced a health bar, but it's easy to avoid losing all health. The inventory is minimal in that you can only carry one item at a time, but that's not a problem until much later when the game starts getting complicated and you need to keep notes where you found which item in order to progress. There's also an annoying maze in the basement, which I'm not ashamed to say that I navigated using a walkthrough. Ain't nobody got time for that. The game uses F&B cutscenes, and is generally quite fun if you're into Myst-type games, until the later part of the game, where you'll need to have a personal assistant just for keeping notes. As for the plot, you play a teenager dared by his friends to spend the night in an abandoned museum which turns out to be haunted. Your task is to release the spirits, put an end to the haunting, and solve a murder mystery on the side. Some of the puzzles are downright nasty in regards to difficulty, but most of them are fun and quite clever. Overall, it takes about 10 hours to complete. In 2016, a trio from Romania, collectively called Stuck in Attic, ran a Kickstarter campaign for Gibbous, a Cthulhu adventure, which got funded and ended up getting released in 2019. In this comedy horror adventure, you play as a librarian who accidentally finds the Necronomicon and ends up turning his cat into a talking one. You also get to play as a detective who is originally hired to find the Necronomicon before getting kidnapped by a cult. Even though the Cthulhu mythos has been done to death, the fact that it's done in a comedic way with cartoony graphics makes this one quite enjoyable, although the overall reviews were somewhat mixed. I personally love the concept, premise, and artwork, so playing this was a no-brainer for me, and if you like comedic adventure games with a touch of Cthulhu cosmic horror, then this one should definitely be an enjoyable affair. The last recommendation for this Halloween is the famous Phantasmagoria. In 1995, Roberta Williams of Sierra fame set out to create the definitive horror point-and-click adventure game. It's no secret that Ken Williams, the founder of Sierra, wanted to have games in a variety of settings, the same way old video clubs had different sections of different genres of movies. Roberta has started toying around with the idea of a horror game some 8 years prior to the release of Phantasmagoria, but it wasn't until 1995 that the game actually got released. It ended up costing some $4.5 million, a third of which was spent on building a studio for the filming of the FMV cutscenes. It had more than 200 people involved in its making, and it was based on a script of about 550 pages. Production lasted a bit more than 2 years, and filming took around 4 months. At first glance, it might look like this was an exercise in throwing money down the drain, but the gamble paid off, and the game grossed $12 million in its opening weekend alone, and became one of the best-selling games of 1995. The premise is about a novelist who is in search for inspiration for her next book, who moves into a remote mansion with her husband, whose previous owner's 5 wives had all mysteriously died. And wouldn't you know it, gosh darn it, the mansion's haunted. It all starts with a nightmare, you see, but I'll leave it at that, since I don't want to spoil too much. I should have made a whole video on this game, but maybe I'll do so next Halloween. Some quick-fire mentions of other horror adventure games are Stasis, a horror sci-fi adventure game from 2015 where you wake up in an abandoned spaceship and need to find a way to escape, and the well-known I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a post-apocalyptic point-and-click which has the brilliant premise of 5 people who are tortured for all eternity by an evil AI supercomputer, but is somewhat rough around the edges as far as the gameplay is concerned. Let me know what you're playing this Halloween in the comments below. I'd also like to know what you have to recommend. It doesn't matter if it's an old game or a newer one. I'm up for anything. Later.
Hey, it disappeared.